In today's video, we're going to be introducing modifiers, which are a great way of rapidly changing the shape of your model in just a few clicks. To access your modifiers, go to the Properties panel and then select the Modifiers tab. It should just have a single option to add modifier. Left click to open up an initial menu. You'll have different modifier categories that you can choose from in this menu. The primary menu that you're going to be using most of the time is the Generate menu. Here you can choose from one of any of these mesh-based modifiers, and they will rapidly change the shape of your model. Select one such as Subdivision Surface and it will add that modifier in a box-like format in the Properties panel. It will also create the effect based on these parameters for the selected object. You can then manipulate these parameters to change the way in which the associated modifier affects the actual object. Some modifiers will have additional settings, which you'll need to left click to access. Normally, these settings can be ignored in terms of the basic functionality of most modifiers, but if you want that extra bit of control, this is how you would access those additional settings. If we bring out the Modifiers tab and the Properties panel, you can see that each of our modifiers has a name. We can actually rename a modifier just by left clicking and then giving it a new name. For example, I might call this stage 1. So this might represent the first stage of changing the look of the model. I can add multiple modifiers at the same time. For example, I can add another modifier, and let's say I wanted to add a second subdivision surface. I can add a second subdivision surface and it will apply the first subdivision surface modifier and then the second to increase the total amount of geometry on our model. So both of these options are going to affect how the object is going to look in the 3D viewport. Again, we can rename all of our modifiers if we wish. So here I might call the second subdivision surface modifier stage 2. To delete a modifier, come over to where we have the X icon and just left click. This is going to remove that modifier from what is known as the modifier stack. We can add another modifier and we can add any of the modifiers that we wish. For example, we may want to add a bevel modifier to create beveled geometry around our object. This brings us to the next point, which is the modifier stack and order. The order in which we apply or create our modifiers will directly impact the final result. For example, here I've got the subdivision surface modifier before my bevel modifier. So we create a spherical shape and then we bevel the geometry created from subdivision surface. But I can reverse this by simply clicking on the 8 dots in the top corner, dragging and placing the subdivision surface modifier below the bevel. Release, and this is going to change the effect that the modifier stack has on the model. So the bevel modifier is affecting the object first, and then the subdivision surface modifier will affect it after that. We have a few options here in addition to renaming and adjusting the basic parameters. So I'm going to remove the bevel, and the first option we have is the on-cage method. If we go into edit mode, we can see the original geometry in its original form. If we tick this option, it's going to mirror the appearance of the object in object mode, rather than maintaining the original shape. The second option here allows us to toggle whether or not the modifier is displayed at all in edit mode. Simply left click, and this will turn off the modifier's visibility while in edit mode. The third option determines whether or not we can display the modifier in the viewport at all. Left click and it turns off the effect of that modifier in the 3D viewport in object mode and beyond. And the final option determines whether or not we will see the effect of that modifier when we render an image. Simply turn this off and Blender will no longer render, taking into account the effect of the subdivision surface modifier. Finally, we have an arrow here that allows us to access other features related to all modifiers. For example, we can duplicate the existing modifier. This will give it a slightly different name, but we can duplicate it as many times as required. We can also readjust the order here, so we can move this one to first, or we can move it to last. Finally, we can apply the modifiers, which takes away the functionality, but makes the geometry that these modifiers create editable in edit mode. So we can select apply to apply the first subdivision surface modifier, and let's also do the same with the second. Now if we go into edit mode, we can select any of the generated geometry from the modifiers and edit it however we like. This concludes the fundamentals of using modifiers in Blender. If you'd like to learn more, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notifications bell icon for more Blender tutorials.